So I'm going to talk about the origins of engaged practice and how it fits into our practice, both as individuals and also as a Sangha practice in Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition. And then I'm going to talk about how engaged practice can help us with regard to climate change. When we start to practice meditation, we're concerned to concentrate and to focus on our breath. And over time, we learn that actually being relaxed is more helpful than trying too hard, and that we need to be gentle with ourselves. And meditation allows our minds to stop thinking and just become aware of our breath and wherever we experience it in our bodies. And with practice, our mind becomes more calm, and then we begin to develop awareness of what Thai refers to as the ultimate dimension, to see the bigger picture of life, not just be caught up in our own little world. We begin to be able to see beyond our own needs and to open to the insight of non-self, that we do not have a separate self. Everything is connected to everything else. We see that the flower contains the seed, the earth, the sunshine, the rain, the person who sowed the seed and who cared for the plant. If we see this, we start to take more care of the world around us. We come to feel connected with what's around us, to see the interbeing nature of things. And that will also help us to get some perspective on the ups and downs of our own life. And it's very important that we do experience this interconnectedness in our own lives. If we don't experience that, then non-self and interbeing are likely to remain abstract concepts, and our meditation practice becomes stuck. It may help us to be calm, but it doesn't help us to open to the bigger picture. And this happened to many people in the early years of Buddhism. The Mahayana Reformation in the 2nd century AD, about 700 years after the death of the Buddha, was a response to that problem, the stuckness of people who were practicing just within their own little bubble. So in the Mahayana tradition, of which Zen Buddhism, our tradition, is a part, the Bodhisattva ideal came into being to help people with their practice. The Bodhisattva is someone who is active in the world and who puts their own enlightenment on hold until they've helped all other sentient beings be freed from suffering. And this is an example of engaged practice, action resulting from the insight of interbeing, enabling the Bodhisattva to connect not just with the historical dimension, but with the ultimate dimension, and to access the mind of love. A very important part of all our practice. And Thich Nhat Hanh Thai has been very active throughout his lifetime in engaged practice, trying to help other people, trying to help the environment. And Thai says that meditation that does not lead to action is not meditation. He really encourages us to practice in an engaged way. So for many of us, when we start to meditate, we're very focused on our own issues and our own practice. But if we continue to practice in our local Sangha, we may be invited to start to facilitate sessions. And that is a way of engaging our practice in the bigger picture. It enables us to move on from concern just with our own personal needs to caring for the needs of others. But of course, we also have to know how to care for ourselves. Thai always says if we want to care for others, first we have to learn to take care of ourselves. And this is really important. I belong to a caring profession, and in my profession and many other caring professions, I see a lot of people suffering from burnout. They're good at caring for the people or the animals around them, but they're not good at taking care of themselves. So it is really critical, if we want to take care of other beings, of the world around us, that we know how to take care of ourselves. And it's important because when we facilitate our Sangha meeting, we are transmitting more than just the bones of the practice, the program, the bells, the Dharma sharing, the meditations. Whether we recognize it or not, we're also clothing those things with our own state of mind. So if we're anxious or controlling or angry, other people will experience that in the way that we speak, the way we invite the bell, the way we facilitate the sharing. And it will affect other people's practice. So if we want to help other people to enjoy their practice, we need to try to arrive in a mindful state, to arrive in good time, and to be able to remain relaxed and calm under whatever extra pressure we feel of leading the practice. And that probably means that we need to start practicing well before the session starts. And that means that we are deepening our practice. And these are skills that we can also use in our everyday lives, bringing mindfulness to our everyday life. I think that was one of the things that really struck me first about this practice when I encountered it after practicing in a different tradition, that this is a practice that is relevant to our everyday lives. And it's made a huge difference to my life, practicing in this way. So if we're practicing in a Sangha with other people who have the same motivation, this can be very supportive. We can learn a lot from each other's experience. And of course, if we are facilitating and we have a problem, then other people may be able to cover for us. We have second body practice in this tradition, in which everybody is able to call on someone else if they're ill or if something happens, so that they're not able to fulfill whatever it is they've undertaken to do. So, as I say, practicing in a Sangha really helps to support our practice. And of course, as a facilitator, we may be involved in making decisions about the Sangha, not just what I would like the Sangha to do, but what would be the best thing to help all the Sangha members. And if we can do this in an open way, an aimless way, we can be open to the suggestions of other people. And this is also a great benefit to our practice. It helps us to enjoy the practice and not to get lost in achieving or not achieving our particular goal or idea. So I've talked about engaged practice in the context of the Sangha, but of course, many of us have an engaged practice outside the Sangha, maybe by doing voluntary work to help other people or other species. It might be through doing environmental work, because we know that we're connected to all other beings and to the earth. But it still really helps if we practice with other people. We find other people with the same concerns, with the same ambition to help whatever it is we're working on. So, as I say, there are many possibilities for engaged practice within our society, and I know that many of us are already involved in doing engaged practice, both in the Sangha and outside the Sangha. But of course, there is one urgent challenge that we all have to face, that of climate change. And I'm going to talk now about climate change and how our engaged practice can help to arrest and hopefully reverse climate change. During the 1960s, the ecologist Rachel Carson wrote a book called The Silent Spring. And it was a book about the potential for a spring time without birdsong. It was about the impact that mankind was having on the natural world. And it was a really groundbreaking moment. It was the first time really that somebody had flagged up the damage that was being done to the environment by human activity. And later, when she was speaking to young people, Rachel Carson said, "The stream of time moves forward and mankind moves with it. Your generation must come to terms with the environment. You must face realities instead of taking refuge in ignorance and evasion of truth. Yours is a grave and sobering responsibility, but it's also a shining opportunity. You go out into a world in which mankind is challenged as it's never been challenged before, to prove its maturity and mastery, not of nature, but of itself." And I think those words still ring true in our current situation with regard to climate change. It is a challenge. It's also an opportunity for us to deepen our practice, to live in a simpler and more mindful way. And ultimately, that will be a happier way for all of us. So, I know some people find climate change a challenge and struggle to see how they can make a difference. But of course, it is up to all of us to try to make a difference. Seeing that there's a problem and not doing anything about it is not an option. That only leads to frustration and depression. So climate change is not something to dread, to run away from, or try to deny. So let's look at what has led to climate change a little. Thich Nhat Hanh says that the problems that we have with global warming and climate change, with mass extinctions and the development of new diseases, has been created by unmindfulness. And that if we're going to find a solution, we need to bring our mindfulness to bear. We know that human beings are completely interwoven with the earth. The earth is our mother. The earth is our home. In the guided meditation earlier, Terry talked about the way in which human beings are made of non-human elements: air, water, earth, fire, space. We have no separate self. What we do to the environment, we're also doing to ourselves. And over the centuries, human beings have overexploited the non-human elements in the land, the forests, the rivers, the oceans, to achieve a higher standard of living. And by doing this, and avoiding looking at the consequences of actions, we've started to divorce ourselves from reality. By destroying nature and polluting the environment, we've caused global warming with extinctions of many plants and animals. And the emergence of new human diseases, such as Ebola and Zika and coronavirus, are also directly related to destruction of habitats and climate change. These things are bringing humans into closer contact with animals such as bats, and which are the reservoir for many viruses. This is partly due to increasing numbers of humans on the earth, but it's also due to our destruction of the environment. So mindfulness practice can help us to look deeply into the problem. If we see the suffering of ourselves and other species, and we invite that into our meditation and make friends with it, we'll begin to understand what's causing it. And in that way, we may start to have insight into how we can act to put an end to the suffering. As the Sufi poet Rumi says, the cure for the pain is in the pain. We have to stay with the pain if we want to have the insight as to how to cure the pain. So these are some of the things that occur to me. The driver for much of the global problem is our Western minds. And the idea that we have that we can find happiness in something external, that new clothes, a new phone, a new car, a bigger house can solve our problems and bring us happiness. And of course, many businesses are very happy to push this idea because it helps them to make money and be profitable. But of course, consumption of goods, like other displacement behaviors like drinking alcohol or taking drugs, only provide temporary anesthetic for our lack of happiness. Buddhism tells us that the seed of happiness already exists in our store consciousness. It's our actions that water this seed and bring us happiness, not our possessions, provided, of course, that we have the basic necessities of life. If we understand this, we begin to see how little we really need, how much we can do without. We start to distinguish between what we want and what we really need. It's not a distinction that's very clear in our society. It's something that we need to keep coming back to. And of course, it's not enough to blame other people for the problem. We have to take responsibility for our own part in this as well, and to be prepared to change our thinking and our behavior. That means that we have to start making informed choices about what we do and what we consume. We have to be more responsible in our actions. Do we need to eat meat or dairy products when we know that these are adding to greenhouse gas emissions? Do we need that foreign holiday, the new jumper, the new suit, the new phone, the new car? Or are we just being self-indulgent? We might think of changing to a greener energy supplier, but we also need to ask the question, is my house properly insulated? Because much of the energy that we consume is lost if our house is not properly insulated. And there are some challenges in this way of thinking. I run an old car. Should I change it for a new energy efficient one? And of course, when I look at this, I realize that actually a lot of the environmental cost of a car is that of producing a new vehicle. Is that going to be outweighed by the increased efficiency of the new vehicle that I might buy? Or should I continue to run my old car? So I need not only to raise the questions, but I also need to look for the best evidence available in making decisions like this. We may decide that we're going to stop consuming meat and dairy products for environmental reasons. But we also need to look at the alternatives. Many soy-based products are produced at considerable ecological cost in parts of the world like Brazil. And then, of course, they have to be shipped across the Atlantic. Is that a good ecological solution? As a veterinarian, I'm used to the fact that we have grazing animals in the countryside. Much of the countryside is not suitable for other forms of agriculture. So do we stop grazing animals and use plant-based proteins instead? Or do we look at the fact that many people are still eating animals and dairy products and just try and produce those things in the most ecological way? We have to be pragmatic here. Just because we've become vegetarian or vegan doesn't mean that everybody else is going to do so immediately either. So we have to think about the balance with these things. And of course, if we stop grazing animals in the uplands of the United Kingdom, the uplands are going to change. A lot of the open spaces that we see are going to go back to forest, up probably to about 2,000-foot contour. We will have oak and birch scrub going up to about 2,000 feet. So the appearance of the countryside will change. That is not a good thing or a bad thing. It's the way things were before we started grazing animals, and many species did very well under those circumstances. But we have to recognize that we have a resistance to change. We love to see the Lake District with its open green hills and mountains. And the thought that we might lose that site and that it would be forested may cause us some concern. But we have to recognize that we need to look at the bigger picture. So we have to look beyond our own individual needs and our own concerns and try and engage with the bigger picture. And of course, during the coronavirus pandemic, much of the economic activity of business has been on hold during the lockdowns and subsequent restrictions. And we hear a lot about getting back to normal. We can't afford to get back to normal as it was before. It was normal that got us into the mess that we are in now. We need to look at a new normal. We have to persuade governments that going back to business as before is not a long-term solution. We need to move from an economy that's based on positive growth being seen as essential. But that's clearly unsustainable. To an economy that's based on consuming local products and produce, recycling as much as possible, minimizing the use of resources, and not exploiting people in impoverished countries, as we do at the moment. We've seen that we can't rely on positive growth to combat poverty. Society needs to think about how we can restructure in a less exploitative mold. We have to try to ensure that wealth is evenly distributed. Many wars are the result of poverty and unequal distribution of wealth. So establishing fairer economic systems will help efforts to build peace. My grandfather, who was a wise old man, used to say, "Money is a good servant and a very poor master." We live in a society that has made money our master. It's not made us happy. It's leading to the destruction of the environment, and ultimately it's leading to the destruction of humanity. We have to think very carefully about these things and think what we can do to change the situation. We have to think not just for ourselves, but we also have to think about our interbeing nature, to take care not only of the environment and other species, but we also need to think about taking care of impoverished populations in third world countries. They are highly at risk of coronavirus right now. We must help them to control the disease in their countries, because otherwise their disease will fuel the next waves of our pandemic. So lots to do, and plenty to feel concerned about or even angry about. But if we act out of anger, we run the risk of creating a hostile response in those that we're trying to influence. And we've already seen that. People blocking the M25, people bringing city centres to a standstill. I question how helpful those things are. So if we are going to be active in the world and trying to do something about climate change, interacting with other people, we need to transform our own personal anger and suffering and become calm. And if we can do that, our message will act in a more positive way on those whom we're trying to influence, especially if they can see that we are acting out the change that we're advocating. Mahatma Gandhi said, "We have to be the change we want to see." It's not down to other people to make all the changes. We have to take responsibility for changing our own lives. And we have to work with lots of different people if change is going to occur. Many farmers feel threatened by the changes that are happening. There's less demand for milk and meat. Consumers are becoming much more careful about where their food is coming from. Change is difficult for everyone. But given time and support, farmers are beginning to change to more sustainable crops and more sustainable ways of keeping animals. They need our encouragement, our support, not to be blamed for the things that they are still doing that we don't like. We have to continue to work with people. In Britain and in the Netherlands, there are significant areas of countryside that are being restored to enable nature to regenerate, so-called rewilding. And this is something that is becoming quite popular. Many of us may be able to consider rewilding parts of our gardens. We know that the British wildlife has declined dramatically over the last 50 years. And we need to create habitats for insects, for butterflies, for bees. And if we do that, then we'll also increase the number of birds and animals that there are in the countryside again. Those things are at an all-time low in this country. We have to work on these things. And if giving up part of my lawn to create an area for wildflowers is what I have to do, then that seems like a positive thing to be doing. So I've talked a little about working with farmers, but we also have to recognize that there are a lot of other people who don't have the experience to understand, and that they may feel frightened by, well, by the natural world, for one thing, if they live in a city, or by the changes that we're talking about. So we have to help people to understand these things. We need to educate children to build a deep understanding of the environment, not as an additional part of an already overcrowded timetable, but as an essential change of emphasis. And of course, school teachers can't help their students connect to the earth if they've not done so themselves. So they'll need help to build their own connections to nature. Fortunately, there are voluntary groups that are helping some schools to become more aware of the natural world. And that's something that maybe we can help with. So we need to know how to help. We need to know how to take care of ourselves so that we can speak mindfully, act skillfully, and avoid getting burned out. So we have to know how to look after ourselves, and we have to know our limits. It's really important to stay in touch with the positive things that are happening in the world. The news media deluge us, if we allow them, with a constant barrage of negative news from around the world, much of which is way outside our sphere of influence. It's easy to get drowned in that stuff. We have to stay in touch with the positive things that are happening in the world as well. And if we operate as a Sangha, we can help each other with that. It's been said that the human mind is like Teflon to happiness and Velcro to difficulties. We need to maintain a balance so that we can keep touching and watering the seed of happiness in ourselves. I've mentioned working as a Sangha. We can support each other, but we can also look at what resources we're using as a Sangha. Are we doing the best for the environment in the way that we meet, where we meet, what's the ecological impact of our meeting, how can we minimize that? And these are things that we need to address as a community, as well as local sanghas. Many places now are conducting an ecological audit of the way that they work. And if we're going to, for instance, use a retreat centre, then we need to think about, have they done an ecological audit? What is the impact of the way they're operating and of our meeting there? There are lots of things that we can do in that way. And if we all look to do our own bit, but also to look more widely, then things can and will change. They are already changing. We can be part of that change. And we will feel good about being part of that change. And if we can maintain our own sense of peace and happiness, then peace and happiness become possible in the world around us, and the healing of the earth will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Murray.
Let's just enjoy the sound of the bell, and then if anybody has any questions, then I'm very happy to try to respond.